Okay, we seem to be there. So, hello, hello. Yes, and who's here? Hello, Jared and Jerry and Jay Scott and Alexis and Stephen and Kelly. Okay, hello, good to see you all. Jerry, glad you like the whistling. I think I was probably whistling She's a Rainbow by the Rolling Stones, which for some reason is a song that I tend to whistle a lot. Don't ask me why, although it is one of my favorite records. It was one of the first records I ever bought for myself when I was a little. Uh, Not the Stones' greatest record, but one that I'm sentimentally very fond of. So, anyway, that's that. What else going on? Welcome aboard. Good to see you here. It is Sunday, Pacific Daylight Time, about 7:01, and I'm about to start reading. Please bear with me after after reading last night, which, except for the point where there was a bug crawling around on the page that was the exact size of a punctuation mark and kept screwing me up. Immediately after that, as soon as I finished, I realized that we had suddenly had, after a 100-degree day, as we had again today, I think, our third in a row. But anyway, after a 100-degree day, we had a huge thunderstorm, very big, very weird thunderstorm with some quite spectacular lightning that rolled in. This happened just while I was finishing up my reading last night. But the reason I'm telling you about it is because our big dog, Johnny, uh, hates, abominates, despises, and is terrified by thunder and lightning. So it's hard enough to get to sleep after doing a reading anyway, but in this particular case, Johnny was absolutely freaked out all night, poor thing, shivering and panting, and more importantly, he kept going to everybody in the house, especially anybody who was asleep, and thumping on them or climbing up on the bed and sitting on their heads or whatever. Now, Johnny is not a great Bernard, a Saint Bernard or a Great Dane or anything. He's not 200 and something pounds, but he is, 70, 80 pounds, and having that sit on your head by surprise or having one of those big old paws hit you in the face. And particularly difficult last night, poor thing, was that because I was awake and kept trying to get him to come over to me and comfort him and all that, he was not so interested in me. It was much more like he wanted to make sure that everybody who was asleep in the household understood that this was a moment to panic and that everybody needed to panic and they all needed to be awake like him. So he kept coming back in and out of the room and thumping poor Deb on the head. And then Deb, of course, had been asleep for several hours. Then she was awake for probably a couple of hours while we dealt with Johnny. And then I think she finally got back to sleep again, in part because some of the kids who are up anyway, because they're keeping very late hours because, in the pandemic, being home all day, they finally took over at about 6 something in the morning and kept Johnny calm until the last of the thunderstorm had passed. And he calmed down a little bit, poor thing. I keep saying poor thing because you could not see that dog suffering. And, even as he's walking on your head or, trying to climb up and get onto the bed and smack people with his paw to let them know that it was panic time, you couldn't really be angry, although I was exhausted. Everybody was exhausted by the time it was done. So, and yes, we have a thunder coat for him, and we put that on, and we did everything we could. The problem is you can't just close the door and ignore him because he will scratch at the door desperately. And so we had to kind of have all the doors in the house open to give him people to go to and to keep him from ripping the doors to pieces. We don't leave him alone at 4th of July anymore either. So anyway, that was my night last night after the reading finished. And as a result, everybody in the household, including me, are all a bit knackered, exhausted, whatever you want to call it. So I'm feeling fairly perky at the moment, though, because I just lay down to have a nap and got up again. So I should be able to make it through the reading. Okay, and we will hope, pray, cross fingers that we don't have another electrical storm. It was sad, actually, also, because I really like thunderstorms. They don't upset me personally. And in fact, the lightning was very spectacular. Haven't seen lightning like that down here at sea level for a long, long time. So it was interesting. That's all I can say about it. It was interesting in the same sense as the Chinese curse about living in interesting times. So now I am getting ready to go on with life. I hope you are doing the same. I hope you are all staying well. Glad to have you with me, and I'm going to start reading. Just to bring people up to date on what's happening, in case you didn't get to see the last episode, as it were, since I'm reading this book sequentially. The last couple of chapters, which I read last night, was Tailchaser and his friend Pouncequick arrived in First Home, which is where the court of Harar resides, and specifically the Queen of the Cats, Queen Sunback, and her various family members, and of course many, many other cats, which is one of the things that Tailchaser is having to get used to. In the middle of a ceremony with the prince consort, who is talking strangely about Vera Whitewind, who's one of the cats, original 3 cats known as the Firstborn. They're gods, basically. Tailchaser made the mistake of eating a lot of catnip, which he had never had before, and had a real freak out, including a vision of Vera himself. Tailchaser had. Then, when he came out of his bad trip, as it were, he managed to, because of Pouncequick and another cat, a young female cat, Fela, named Roof Shadow, he was brought back and tended to, and then later he woke up again, and he and Pouncequick were led to the court of the Queen to have their official audience. And the last thing we saw, I think I mentioned back some weeks ago about how there's a lot of little Tolkienian bits, some things that I found funny back at the time. And one of them is, of course, their first introduction to Queen Sunback, where the emphasis is on the beauty of the place and the majesty of her person and how she's perfectly all white and fluffy and all that. And as they get there, and they're admiring her, she lifts a beautiful, shapely, graceful leg in the air and starts biting her butt. And that was really actually the end of the chapter. Nothing like a cheap butt-biting joke to punctuate things. And then we're going to be getting on with the next chapter. So that's basically it. So anyway, thank you for bearing with me. Thank you for bearing with me during another exciting episode of The Travails of Tad. All right, so back to Tailchaser's song, chapter 14. To that high capital, his pale court in beauty and decay. Percy B. Shelley. Through the long hour of deepest quiet, audience was held in the court of Harar. Queen Sunback, crouched in the hollow of the great oak, the Vakazme, listened calmly to all who came before her. Tailchaser watched with flagging interest as a procession of claimants presented themselves before the seat. Matters of territory took up the larger part of the audience, but there were also naming confirmations and blessings for expectant Felas. Through it all, the Queen presided, as remote and unblinkingly bright as a star. At last, all the petitioners had disappeared, pleased or disappointed, into the night. The Queen stretched a long, graceful yawn and signaled with her tail. Rumblepurr bustled and tumbled up onto the small plateau and leaned over her. The Queen whispered languorously into his piebald ear, and he bobbed his head assiduously. "Yes, milady, that's right. Right enough," wheezed the old chamberlain. "Well, then, shall we not hear from him?" asked Queen Sunback in a voice like cold, clear stream water. "Of course, your furriness," grunted Rumblepurr, and hurried to the front of the plateau. He squinted his old eyes out into the darkness of the canyon and trumpeted, Thane Squeakerbane of the First Walkers, you may approach the Vakazme. The proud-looking, many-striped hunter, whom Freddie had noticed earlier, rose, stretched, and calmly approached the leveled mound. He paused for a moment at the edge of the rise, then vaulted effortlessly up into the circle of light. A First Walker! Like Quiverclaw and Scuffleding, piped Pouncequick excitedly. Freddie nodded as he examined Squeakerbane. In the eyelight that surrounded the oak seat, the Thane's wiry body showed traces of many old whitened scars beneath his short fur. Stripes and scars gave Squeakerbane the look of weathered wood. At your service as ever, O Queen, said the First Walker, touching his chin respectfully to the ground. Sunback looked down with cool amusement. We do not often see the First Walkers here at court, she said, even those of you who haunt the rootwood near First Home. This is an unexpected honor. With all due respect, your exaltedness, the First Walkers do not haunt the rootwood. Squeakerbane spoke with a rough but quiet pride. As you know, however, we do prefer the solitude of the wild. The court is too crowded for our tastes. He sang the word crowded with a subtly disdainful inflection that brought a look of wintry humor to the face of Dewtreader. So we are told, Thane, fluted the prince consort. So we are told, Thane, fluted the prince consort, but I have heard it whispered that a vast meeting of the First Walkers is assembling east of Gentle Run Downs. Will your comrades not find so much society fully as depressing as our court? Squeakerbane glowered, and Sunback sneezed delicately and curried her tail. The Thane spoke with obvious restraint. The Thane meet is occasioned by the same matter that brings me here. The prince consort, undoubtedly with good reasons, known only to his highness, seeks to open old wounds. I will not be tail-tweaked. There are graver issues at stake here. Rumblepurr, who had remained standing, now huffed uncomfortably and went to sit near Prince Fencewalker, who was showing an interest in the proceedings for the first time all night. I wish y'all would stop squabbling for a while, grumped the prince. It would be nice to speak of something important for a change. Queen Sunback regarded her son for a moment, then flicked her ears twice and turned to Squeakerbane. Brash and bumptious though he may be, Fencewalker has spoken well. You must forgive our rudeness, Thane. I realize your concerns must weigh heavily on you, and you do not have our taste for badinage. She sent a cold stare in Dewtreader's direction, which the prince consort returned imperiously. Speak on, Squeakerbane, please, the queen said. The battle-scarred First Walker stared at her for a moment, then bowed his head low again and held it there for the space of several heartbeats. As your regal softness is aware, he began, we First Walkers are few in number, and our thanages are widespread. I myself have jurisdiction over much of the Sun's Nest Plains and this part of Rootwood, excepting First Home, of course, he added with a sly smile for Prince Dewtreader. The territories Uayward, north of the Catterwall, were formerly the protectorate of my cousin, Thane Brushstalker. Now he is dead. Squeakerbane paused significantly. The queen leaned forward, curiosity in her bright eyes. We are sad to hear of the passing of Brushstalker from these fields, of course, said the queen thoughtfully. He was a brave and canny hunter, but we still do not understand the purpose of your embassy. The First Walkers have always determined their own succession without recourse to our court. Squeakerbane sat back and scratched impatiently. And so we shall continue to do, O Queen. It is not Brushstalker's legacy, but the manner of his passing that brings me here. Brushstalker was attacked by an unknown enemy and torn to pieces. The other walkers of his thanage have disappeared. Queen Sunback, crouched in the split-bark hollow of the vacasme, gave a shudder of distaste. The pearly inner wood of the trunk framed her white form as she peered out at the Thane. "How horrible," she said. Dewtreader stepped toward the Thane on silent pads. "What beast committed this act?" he demanded, "and what can we do about it that you have come to us with the story?" Pretty, seated among the few remaining onlookers, felt Pouncequick go tense like a bent sapling at his side. So this is what had brought Quiverclaw and the others up from the south, he thought. "None of the folk can say, Majesties," answered Squeakerbane. "It was a powerful creature indeed, if it was only one. If it was a hunting pack, it is no less disturbing. Brushstalker was savaged." Sunback had regained her aplomb. "Why do you come to us, though, to make us uneasy?" she asked. "Brushstalker's fate is terrible to hear of, but Ratleaf and the Northern Territories have long been dangerous, forbidding places. Why do you bring us these upsetting stories?" "I do not bring these portents just to upset the tranquility of First Home," spoke Squeakerbane, scarred head proudly erect. "I come to alert you to peril, because I think the court is in a hazardous state of complacency. This is not an isolated incident. I know that, and so do you. Your son has been patrolling the borders of First Home because of troubles closer to Nest." "Now we're getting to it," said Fenswalker, pleased, but Dewtreader raised a slender paw and interrupted him. "There have been marauders on our borders, but it is nothing to raise hackles over," said the Prince Consort in his musical voice. "Wild growlers, perhaps, or a sickened gown. There could be many explanations. So also with this lamentable death of Brushstalker." The battered old Thane eyed Dewtreader with quiet contempt. "The massive Garin can be dangerous, of course," he said, "but they are winter sleepers, and these developments began during the last snows. I think that they will continue through this year's snow, when the Garin have again gone to ground." Dewtreader met his stare, but said nothing. "Whatever is lurking in the Northern Territories, and beginning to spread out, is not a natural child of this world, as many can attest. I have lived in the high places and the deep places, but I have never seen anything like this." "What do you mean, Thane?" questioned Queen Sunback. "I am afraid we do not understand." "Something strange has settled in the area across the Harar Scrape. The forest creatures of Ratleaf are migrating outward, fleeing the area in swarms. The birds who nest there at this season are flying away across the big water. Of all the folk, you in First Home should know why that portends dangerous times." "Make your point, First Walker," said Dewtreader, his voice cold. "It should be obvious. Here around First Home is the greatest concentration of the folk to be found anywhere. A hungry hunting mob constantly beating the brush for fluffars and squeaker. Yet those creatures still remain, having bigger litters and hatchings than in other places, perhaps, but still living out their lives here. Rootwood is their ancestral home as much as it is ours. We folk, and the ones on whom we prey, all dance together. That is how it should be. Whatever has taken up the northern flats, though, and raised a mound, a pile of tailings near as big as all of First Home, that is something that the creatures of Ratleaf Forest cannot live with. This is a danger we would all do well to regard." "Bravo!" shouted Fenswalker. "Leaping hurrah, but it's good to hear somebody has some sense around here." Queen Sunback seemed about to speak. Fritty and Pouncequick, indeed all those assembled, leaned imperceptibly forward to hear her pronouncement. Dewtreader, however, rose and yawned. "Well," he said calmly, "there is much in what you say, Thane, and much of it is new to us. The mound in particular sounds a very strange thing indeed. We shall have more discussion of it later. For the moment, however, we do not find it meet to go kitten-paddling off after rumors and mounting uninformed expeditions into what you yourself have said is very evil territory. Squeakerbane seemed about to protest, but Dewtreader whipped his brown-tipped tail from side to side, and the first walker held his peace. However, continued Dewtreader pointedly, we are not insensible to danger. The Queen's son, the gallant Prince Fencewalker, has our permission to levy what folk he deems necessary, with an eye to safeguarding the borders of our territory. We may begin at once. Wonderful! The prince leaped excitedly to his feet. I'm so pleased, he burbled. A little inappropriately, Tailchaser thought, and with a leap and a bound, Fencewalker was gone into the darkness. Now, continued the cold-eyed prince consort, we will also ask that when you have met with your fellow first walkers, Thane, you return and do us the courtesy of sharing your conclusions with the court of Hurrah. Is that possible? Certainly, your highness, said Squeakerbane, somewhat taken aback. I hope we can continue to cooperate on this. Of course, said Dewtreader. Those are the Queen's wishes. Am I correct, my many-whiskered queen? He asked, turning to Sunback. The Queen, lulled by the familiar sound of court routine, only waved her tail distractedly in assent. Very well. Then I suppose that brings an end to the night's audiences. We thank you again, Thane Squeakerbane, for bringing these matters to our attention. Please extend our heartfelt sorrow to the friends and relations of Brushstock. Dewtreader had actually begun to leave the platform when Rumblepurr spoke up distractedly. Begging your pardon, Lord, but I believe there was one more waiting their turn, if you see what I mean. Dewtreader returned to the grassy knoll wearing a look of annoyance that he swiftly muted into bland indifference. The Queen was paying no attention at all. In fact, she was grooming her flank as she reclined between the spreading roots of the Vacasme. Very well, said the prince consort. Where are they? Bring them forward. Fritty and Poundsquick, totally unprepared, were urged forward by Rumblepurr. The chubby Tom leaned forward and whispered to Fritty, Try to keep it short, youngling. Their eminences are a trifle out of sorts. Nervous Fritty could see this clearly. Poundsquick was almost completely overcome by shyness and trembled silently beside Tailchaser as they stood before the great oak. What are your names, and why have you come before us? Asked Prince Dewtreader. I'm Tailchaser, and this is my companion, Poundsquick. We are of the Meeting Wall clan, from the far side of the old woods. We are seeking a friend of ours named Hushpad. Fritty's voice was weak. The Queen finally seemed to notice the two small cats. Do you think she is here in First Home? She asked, turning her gleaming eyes on them. Poundsquick, keyed up to a fever pitch, gave a whimper of despair and buried his head in Tailchaser's hip. Fritty swallowed and spoke. No, great Queen, we do not think so. We do think it is possible that she has been taken by the creature or creatures of which Squeakerbane spoke. Many of the other folk of the Meeting Wall clan have also disappeared mysteriously. The elders sent a delegation to this court for that very reason. He finished hurriedly. Sunback yawned widely, showing sharp teeth as white as her pelt, and an impossibly pink tongue. Have we received such a delegation? She asked Rumblepurr. The old chamberlain pondered for a moment. Can't say as we have, your softness, he said finally. Don't think I've heard of the Meeting Wall clan before this. It's a dead rat certainty that no embassy has arrived from there. There you are, then, said Dewtreader. I'm afraid that the doings of the big, wide world sometimes pass our little court right by. I'm truly sorry that we couldn't help you. Feel free to stay in First Home as long as you need to. Perhaps if you're interested in all that, you could be of help to Fenswalker. You are past your hunt song, aren't you? Well, no matter. Refoul, Queen's audiences are at an end. Howlsong, who had fallen asleep at the outer edge of the canyon while he waited, led them silently back through the forest. Fritty, full of vague resentment and gloom, had no conversation to offer either. After a long stretch of unspeaking travel, Pouncequick finally broke the stillness. Just think, Tailchaser, he said. We've actually been to see the Queen of Cats. Chapter 15. I do not know which to prefer, the beauty of inflections or the beauty of innuendos, the blackbird whistling or just after. Wallace Stevens. The days passed swiftly in First Home. Outside the sheltering vastness of the rootwood, winter had come. Fritty and Pouncequick chased away time beneath the great trees, exploring, hunting, becoming fat and glossy of coat. Roofshadow, still polite and reserved, spent a great deal of time with them. She seemed in particular to enjoy accompanying Pouncequick on his various expeditions. One dark afternoon, when the kitten and the gray Phala were out wandering the mazes of First Home, Tailchaser found himself alone. Howlsong was on an initiation stalk prior to his Oilsirva ceremonies and would be gone for 2 sunrises. As the other residents of First Home, very few of whom Fritty even recognized, bustled to and fro on secret errands and assignations, Tailchaser strolled beneath the trees by himself. It had been a long time since he had gone anywhere without the accompaniment of a chattering voice or even the presence of a companion. He meandered to the southern edge of First Home, where the trees gave way to the edge of Sun's Nest, walking at his own pace, listening to his own inner songs. He wandered out beyond the forest's eaves and down a grassy, sloping meadow sprinkled with feathery early snow. He was so tightly wrapped in thought that he did not hear the icy burblings of the purr-whisper until he stood on its banks. Crouched on his haunches, fur ruffled against the chilly wind and fluttering snow, he watched the river splash past, passing out of his sight to the east, Vezan, where it would eventually join the Caterwall. Farther, much farther still, was the place of his nesting and kittenhood, and the forest and fields where he had run with Hushpad through the bright sky summer. He slid his eyes against the cold breeze as he stared out across the plain. He thought about going home. Rootwood would never be a home to him. Somewhere out there, beyond the winter lands, was the meeting wall. Somewhere out there were his friends, but not his family, and not Hushpad. For some long time he sat, tail curled around his paws, then rose and walked back up the steep meadow, with the laughter of Purr-whisper diminishing behind him. Tailchaser, chirped Pouncequick, we've been looking about for you. Did you go exploring? Roofshadow and I have something important to tell you. Fritty stopped to wait as the kitten bounced up the trail toward him. Good dancing, Pounce, he said. And to you, Roofshadow. The Phala looked brooding and preoccupied. I have some news myself. Let's go back to our tree and out of the wind. In the bower, as the wind shook the treetops high overhead, Fritty addressed his friends in a serious tone. I hope you will understand what I'm going to tell you and will think well of me. I have been thinking about it quite a lot today. The decision was not so hard as wondering how to tell you. I have to leave First Home. I've stayed here too long already, and I'm losing my purpose. But the promise I made is just as important as it was when I made it. I cannot winter here quietly while Hushpad is undiscovered. After going to the court and hearing all that was said, I've concluded that no further help can be expected here. It seems that something is happening in the north, and I believe that is where I must go to continue my search. I'm quite frightened, really, and every one of my whiskers is a twitch at the prospect, but I must go. Harar knows sometimes I wish I. Pouncequick, are you laughing? Pouncequick was indeed laughing, snorting little giggles and thumping Roof Shadow with his paw. Oh, 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 Tailchaser, he said between sneezes. Of course we must go. That's what Roof Shadow and I were talking about today, and several other days also, but Roof Shadow said you had to decide for yourself when to leave. Freddie was taken aback. We? But Pounce, it's the cold season. I can't take you along with me. It's not your oath, your ridiculous promise. And besides, forgive me, you're awfully brave, but you're still just a kitling. This may be terribly dangerous, don't you see? I know that. Pouncequick had a more serious expression, but he was still enjoying Tailchaser's discomfiture. I think that between you and Roof Shadow, you'll manage to keep me out of harm. And perhaps we can do the same for you. Roof Shadow? Now Freddie was astonished. Roof Shadow? You must not understand how risky this all is. Keep Pounce here, I beg of you. Hurrah! Have you both gone as mad as old Eatbugs? Roof Shadow stared at Tailchaser with cool, deep eyes. I too wish the young one didn't insist on going, but he does. Who am I to know the way of Mirslar? She calls the folk to many different purposes. As for me, well, I do not fault you for not knowing, but others besides yourself have scores to settle and promises to keep. But, Freddie began. The gray cat cut him off. Tailchaser, before you ever came to First Home, I stood before the Vakazme asking for help. I got no more assistance than you did. I, too, had thought about striking north to seek answers, and was about to set off when you two arrived and broke my resolve. Now I am ready again. Freddie stared. I come from the far side of Rootwood, Roof Shadow began. My birthing place is separated by many leagues and countless trees from the seat of Sunback. My sire was Slipwhisker, one of the elders of the Forest Light clan. He was a respected hunter, and I had many younger brothers and sisters. As a young Fela, I scorned the young males in our tribe. They were overbold and self-satisfied. When I came into my season, I made sure to be far away from the clan, so I would not be betrayed by my nature into bearing a litter that I did not yet desire. I found that I enjoyed being by myself, enjoyed the solitary way of the hunter. I wandered far afield, usually alone. Sometimes I would take my little nest brother, Snufflenose. He was one of the few forest light folk whose company I cared for. Here Roof Shadow looked away into the forest heights for a moment. When she'd turned her gaze back to Freddie, her face was as calm as before. Slipwhisker, who sired me, would sometimes tease me about whether I was a Fela at all, or instead a small and slender Tom. I think he was proud, though. I could hunt as well as any of the young males, and bragged about it a good deal less. One morning I had resolved to go exploring, Award, into the rootwood. I asked little Snufflenose if he wanted to come with me, but he was not feeling well. He asked me if I would stay and keep him company around the nest, but the smell of the morning was strong, and there were new and exciting currents tickling my whiskers. I left him behind and went out on my own. I will not grieve you with a long tale. I returned well after deepest quiet and found a horror such as I could scarcely believe. Most of my clan were dead, torn as if attacked by a Thicaz pack. Snufflenose was one of them. No dog pack could ever have caught the entire Forest Light clan by surprise. Those whose bodies were not scattered about the forest were gone with no trace. Slipwhisker was one of them. For many days, I was as mad as a fluffaz who has eaten poison berries. When my dreams were in the sunlight again, I came through the forest to First Home. I waited long for an audience, and when I was seen, they told me it was the brawling Garin, the honey lovers who had destroyed my folk. I know better. When I saw you in Pouncequick, I knew that our paths had come together for a reason. Pouncequick is much like my brother Snufflenose, and now he is my friend. And you, Tailchaser, I'm not sure why, but I feel drawn to you also. Roof Shadow averted her eyes as she said this last. Anyway, these are my sorrows, and now I think you understand my desires. We will go together. After long moments of silence, Fritty turned to Pouncequick. Did you know all this? He asked weakly. Some, Kitten replied, but not all. Why are such terrible things happening, Tailchaser? I can't say, Pounce. Roof Shadow looked up. The fires that had been kindled in her eyes during her story had abated. She looked cold and tired. We had best leave soon, or we shall not leave at all, she said flatly. The winter is killing fierce in all this part of our fields. As if in answer, the wind sounded a whistling call through the branches above. Chapter 16. The long light shakes across the lakes, and the wild cataract leaps in glory. Blow, bugle, blow, set the wild echoes flying. Blow, bugle, answer echoes, dying, dying, dying. Alfred, Lord Tennyson. The snow fluttered and swirled through the columned byways of Rootwood. A near silent group of cats, Fritty and his companions among them, wandered in straying disorder through the trees. Scattered paw prints slowly filled with powdered snow behind them. Fencewalker and his group of conscripts were moving out to the northern border of First Home. Squeakerbane was accompanying them to the forest's edge, where he would turn Vezan for sourweed's thingage. When Tailchaser and his companions had asked to come along, Fencewalker had been surprised, and Squeakerbane a little suspicious, but neither had offered objections. Why, in the name of Blueback's hind bristles, you want to go padding around in the UA territories at this season, and with a Fela, and a youngling besides? I don't var, but it's your pelt, my catling, Prince had grumped. Fencewalker's conscripts were mostly a mixed lot of young hunters and battered old toms who were not finding favor with the Felas. One or two, like young Snare Mouse, and of course Day Hunter and Nightcatcher, looked as though they would prove reliable in troublesome situations, but Tailchaser had doubts that the rest would be much use around Pouncequick's red-clawed monsters. The ragged band showed none of the discipline that had been evident among Quiverclaw's first walkers. They meandered far afield as the group passed through the forest, each reluctant to perform the uncat-like role of staying with his fellows. As a result, when the group stopped to sleep or discuss directions, it took ages for the stragglers to come trooping in. Quite often, the missing would have to be searched for. In the coldest parts of final dancing, the band would huddle together for warmth, bodies piled and sprawled piecemeal like falling leaves. A sudden movement usually meant a paw in someone else's eye or nose, and there was endless scuffling. Of the three companions, only Pouncequick seemed to find any pleasure in the journey. Tailchaser and Roof Shadow were often quiet, deep in thought, the Fela especially remaining aloof from Fencewalker's fractious crew. So the strange company traveled on through the tree-beamed halls of outer Rootwood, over the thin blanket of new snow. Fifth eye-rise, out from the court of Harar, the travelers noticed the Rootwood beginning to thin. Soon Squeakerbane, Tailchaser, and his companions would separate from Fencewalker's caravan to go their own ways. In honor of their last night together, the folk halted early that evening. They found a sheltered copse, out of the wind and with only the faintest wisp of white on the earthen floor. They split up to hunt. One by one they returned after varying degrees of success. Roof Shadow and Tailchaser did not hunt, but instead took a silent walk through the woods. Side by side they paced, unspeaking, their noses filled with the crisp bite of winter, the delicate crunching of their pads on the snow the only sound. Watching the gray Phala move gracefully beside him, Freddie more than once felt the urge to speak, to elicit some reaction from the calm, silent Roof Shadow, but he could not bring himself to break the stillness. After they had paused to watch the bright points that speckled the night sky, they walked back to the copse as quietly as they had come. Pouncequick, puffed with chill and excitement, had also just returned. He had gone hunting with the prince and had apparently kept his squeaking to a minimum. They had been successful. "Isn't it cold?" he piped. "Fencewalker's an awfully good hunter. You should have seen us. Here he comes now." The prince approached, passing through a gaggle of other folk who were wandering back, some licking their muzzles. Fencewalker approached the trio and dumped a plump Chick-Chick on the ground before them. "I hope you will do me the honor of sharing my kill," he said with more than a touch of pride. Freddie's stomach rumbled as he watched his companions fall too, but he remembered his oath to Lord Snap. This promise-keeping seems a memory of a way to go about things, he thought ruefully. Fencewalker looked up, his muzzle steaming with squirrel blood. "Here now, Tailchaser, old fella, what are you waiting on?" he asked. "It's too difficult to explain, O Prince. I am honored by your kind offer, but I just can't eat right now." Freddie's resolve seemed stronger than his hunger, but he did not feel comfortable that would last long. He moved away from his companions. "Well, let everyone groom himself, I always say," muttered Fencewalker philosophically, and returned to the fast disappearing Chick-Chick. Later, after all the hunters had returned, the group gathered itself into a close-pressed circle, backs against the breeze that swept through even this well-protected stand of trees. They took turns boasting and telling stories. Many of the folk that Fencewalker had brought from First Home proved quite adept at relating funny songs and tales. "Chances are they're better storytellers than they'll ever be fighters," muttered Thane Squeakerbane to Furstuff, the only first walker who had accompanied him from his Thanage to the court. After a while, young Snaremouse got up, after much urging from his fellows, and did a dance. He bobbed and crouched, now sliding on his stomach, now leaping in the air as if he were being pulled into the sky by his black nose. At times, only his tail would move, forming strange and hilarious curves as Snaremouse stood stock still, with a look of intense concentration on his face. The party whooped with glee when he was done. Overheated, he ran off to roll in a small snowdrift. Squeakerbane, who, despite himself, had enjoyed Snaремouse's dance, rose and stretched. One of the First Home cats called out for him to tell a story. The rest of the assembly agreed and pressed him for a tale. "Very well," the Thane said, closing his eyes in thought for a moment. "A story I shall give you. Do not take offense if I tell you that we prefer stories with a little less fluff and a little more bone, we first walkers." Opening his eyes, Squeakerbane shook his scarred, bristly body and sat back on his haunches. "What your esteemed Prince Consort, Dewtreader, said about Ninebirds and his deformed progeny has put me in mind of something. Do you all know how Man, the servant, and Azirile, the folk, first fell out? It is an old story, but not much told around the court, I'll warrant." None but Fencewalker and one or two of the older Toms had ever heard of this tale. The prince said he could not remember how it went. "Ah, but we first walkers make a practice of remembering things like this," said Squeakerbane with a brief smile. "In the wilderness, always walking, past Lord Firefoot, lone and homeless, he chanted in a sing-song voice. Many seasons forth from first home had he traveled, seeking, searching, in the wastelands under strange skies, where the folk had never wandered. After a pause, the Thane began his narrative. In the time of Prince Strongclaw, in the long and felicitous reign of Queen Windruffle, our Lord Firefoot hunted deep into the farthest reaches of southern Rootwood. He had been many winters in the wild and had seen no folk for many a season turn. He had run with the Vizzle, wrestled with the ponderous Garin, and raced the fleet Priere. He missed the company of his own kind, but he had vowed never to return to the court of his father until White Wind was avenged. One afternoon he met another cat walking on the edge of Rootwood, the most beautiful of the folk he had ever seen. Tail like summer, warmly waving, finest fur in breezes blowing, clear of eye and lithe of paw step, like a spirit for Lord Firefoot. The beautiful one was the color of grain swaying in the broad fields beyond the Kusef, as soft and downy as the cloud cats over Sun's Nest. "What is your name, lovely one?" asked Lord Firefoot. "My name is Windflower," replied the newcomer in a voice as sweet as a tiny stream. "Who are you?" "Do you not know me?" asked the firstborn. "I am Tangalore Firefoot, child of Goldeneye and Skydancer, hunter and wanderer of the first blood." "That sounds nice," said Windflower, raising a wonderfully tapered paw. "Would you like to walk with me a while?" Lord Firefoot was overcome with admiration for the beauteous Windflower, and they walked together. Long they wandered, leaping, laughing, Firefoot and the soft Windflower. Most enraptured was the firstborn, till he learned the dreadful story. "Windflower, do you have many brothers in your home?" asked Firefoot after a while. "No, I live in a dwelling of man. No other folks share my nest." "That is odd, then, because I scent a strange Tom, although very faintly. Could we be followed?" Firefoot looked inquiringly about as he padded along on his fiery red paws. "I do not think so," spoke Windflower sweetly. "You are the only Tom, besides myself, that I have seen all day." Lord Tangalore whirled about, stunned. "Are you not a Fela?" he yowled. "But how can that be? You seem in all respects unlike a male." The firstborn was terribly embarrassed. "Oh," said Windflower, "I suppose it is because of what the man-folk did to me." Startled Firefoot hard did gaze then, saw the truth of Windflower's speaking. All his Tomhood had been taken, changed he had been to half-Fela. "Man!" howled Lord Firefoot, "treacherous brood of Ninebirds! They have defiled the folk. I shall be revenged upon them all some day." So saying, he ran into the forest, departing forever the crippled Windflower. So spoke Firefoot, cursed the big ones. Out of sun they are forever. Now the servants make them masters, but the true folk ne'er are vanquished. And so the first walkers, by the word of our Lord Firefoot, never will walk in the shadow of man. Squeakerbane, having finished his story, lay down again between Furscuff and Fencewalker. There was a moment's strained silence, and then the prince spoke. "Well now, I've never held much with those stretched hairless folk myself. Quite a story, quite a story." Everyone relaxed, and many of the group congratulated Squeakerbane on his tale. More riddles and songs followed, and eventually even the overexcited Pouncequick was tired enough to fall asleep. Fritty, too, his head full of Hushpad and Firefoot and Red Claws, finally crossed the borders of the dream fields. The furry tangle of folk drowsed and grumbled away the waning hour of final dancing. The hour of smaller shadows found the travelers descending to the rootwood fence. the final stand of conifers and aspens that separated the ancient forest from the bluffs overlooking the Harar Scrape Canyon. Here the prince's party would establish their border watch, and the others would go their own ways. The sun shone brightly, although the weather was chill. Stopping at the fence, they could see the sparsely foliaged flatlands, shrouded in the merest sprinkling of snow, stretching away before them to the edge of the mighty canyon. Turning to the first walkers, Squeakerbane and Furscuff, Prince Fencewalker bobbed his head in farewell. "Well met, in good dancing, Thane," he said. "Be sure to see me first when the Thane meet is finished, before wasting your news on those old sit-on tails back at the court. Know that I, for one, will value your words." "Many thanks to you, O Prince," said Squeakerbane gravely. "It is good to know that true hearts still beat in the ancient home of our folk." The first walker looked over to Tailchaser and his two companions. "These three, Furscuff and I, will accompany for a short while, until our paths separate. Go in the watchfulness of our Lord Firefoot, Fencewalker." He and Furscuff then moved a respectful distance apart, as Fritty, Pouncequick, and Roofshadow came forward to say their farewells. On the verge of departure, into the unknown but seemingly ill-starred territories, Tailchaser found himself reluctant to part company with Fencewalker. He knew he would miss the bluff, warm-hearted prince very much. When he tried to speak, no words came forth, and he had to pretend to dislodge a burr from his tail, while Roofshadow stepped forward and thanked Fencewalker for his aid. "Good dancing, Prince," added Pouncequick. "I saw ever so many fascinating things at First Home that I will always remember. You've been wonderful to us." "Pounce speaks for me also," said Fritty quietly. "We owe you much." Fencewalker laughed. "Marsh mud! I'm in your debt also. For information about the Aaward territories, if nothing else. Stay out of trouble, and that will be my reward." The others in Fencewalker's party crowded forward now and said their raucous farewells. As Tailchaser and the others walked away, Fritty found his words at last and called back to the prince. "Prince Fencewalker, you also keep yourself safe and happy." "Not to worry, little friend," boomed the hunter. "I walked these borders before I was old enough to be named. You need have no fear for us." The prince and his band disappeared back into the outskirts of the forest. The sun was low in the sky as the five cats picked their way down the sloping plains. Squeakerbane, with help from Furscuff, was describing the terrain that they could expect to find ahead. "Actually," he was saying, "you need to proceed north rather than in the direction we're going now, if you want to get across the Harar Scrape. That way lies the ford, but I think you should come with us a bit farther, just to see Grumble Roar. It is worth the extra half day, and not really very far out of your path." As they walked, ever-curious Pouncequick questioned the Thane about the story he had told the previous night, and the first walker's attitude toward the court of Harar. "After all," he asked, "don't lots of the folk live with man, in man-dwellings? Why is that wrong?" The crusty old Thane took the querying in good grace. It seemed that no one ever felt offended by Pouncequick, Fritty noted wryly, except badgers and Vizzle. "The wrong, youngest hunter," explained Squeakerbane, "is that we are the folk, not growlers who need to be led to live, who hunt in packs and fawn on any that give them food. The folk have always survived on their wits and skill, performing the earth dance without help. Now half our number or more live in bloated indolence, emasculated and imprisoned, but uncaring, rising only to eat the food provided them by the children of 9 birds. Although he strove to maintain calm, the scarred visage of the Thane revealed the depth of his feelings. "And now," he continued, "even in the court where our Lord Firefoot once lived, this poison has crept in. Dew-treader and his wearying mysticism and fatalism. It is wrong. Anyone can see that a cat must run, must hunt. And the queen, Tangalore, forgive me, she eats from a bowl, as if she belonged to one of those hulking, unintelligible brutes that we cast out untold generations ago. The queen of the folk does not even hunt. Squeakerbane was trembling with suppressed rage, and after a moment shook his head. I should not allow myself to become angry, he said. But in our time of great danger, to see those mewing sycophants lolling about while our kin are being destroyed. Forgive me. The Thane lapsed into silence, and for a long time the others imitated him. The travelers approached Grumbleroar near the end of Stretching Sun. Here on the rim of the Harar Scrape, the cold air was thick with swirling mists. A muted rumbling was all around. Squeakerbane, who had not spoken for some time, suddenly showed a brightened aspect. This is something you may pass along in story to litters yet unborn, he said to Roof Shadow. At the canyon's edge, the sound grew louder until it was a deafening clamor. Fritty winced. It was obvious that the name Grumbleroar was well chosen. The mists were so thick at this spot that Squeakerbane decided to lead them across the Purr-whisper near its descent over the edge of the Harar Scrape. As they traversed the slippery, water-slimed rocks, and the Purr-whisper, no longer the gentle stream that flowed past First Home, frothed below them, Fritty felt a moment of regret for all the times he had allowed himself to be led since he had left home. A fitting end to this whole ridiculous trip, he thought, pounded and splashed to death by the safest river in all of Mirslar's fields. But they made it across, even Pouncequick avoiding disaster. Back at the cliff's rim, they could see the Purr-whisper pounding over the precipice, plummeting down the canyon's edge in a foaming white surge to churn and plunge off the rocks into the mighty Caterwaul far, far below. The water rose up from the swiftly flowing river at the bottom of the Harar Scrape, and from where they crouched, the setting sun, shining through this curtain of mist, tore the sky into glittering gold, red, and purple. Grumbleroar Falls bellowed like a furious beast, and the cat stared out at its awesome power. When unfolding dark finally mantled the sun, Squeakerbane led them back up the banks of the Purr-whisper, away from the cliff's edge. As the roar of the falls faded to a faint booming, they stopped. Stunned as they were by the magnificence of Grumbleroar, it was some time before Tailchaser and his friends realized that Furscuff and the Thane were preparing to leave them. I'm sorry we cannot guide you farther, said Squeakerbane, but as it is, we shall be several sun turns late for the Thane meet. My suggestion is that you continue along the canyon wall, as I mentioned before, and cross over at the Slender Leap. It would be well to wait for sun high before you cross, even if you reach it tonight. It is a treacherous path. They said their farewells then, for the first walkers were in a hurry to continue onward. Remember, said Squeakerbane as they parted, the lands you are walking into bear an evil name these days. Tread warily. I wish there was more that we could do, but you have set your paws onto strange roads, and who knows what may come of that. So saying, the Thane and his companion took their leave. For the better part of 2 more hours, the 3 companions headed west, following the edge of the Harar Scrape. All were full of their own thoughts. When they reached the massive tree that stood solitarily on the canyon's rim, marking the near side of Slender Leap Ford, they curled up quietly and went to sleep. Fritty did not dream. And bingo! That is the end of the chapter. And now, starting with the next chapter or so, stuff begins to happen. It's a tad book. You know you have to get like a third of the way into it before stuff starts to go off. But anyway, so that was the end. And next Sunday, we will continue with chapter 17. So anything else I want to say? It's already 8 o'clock. Not really. Want to thank you for joining me. Want to thank you for taking care of yourself and others. Want to remind you that these are difficult times, and it's times like this when everybody gets to show their mettle, mettle, in one sense or another. Well, if you got other kinds of metal, you can show that too. I mean, be my guest, but I'm talking about the other spelling. These are the times that try people's souls, or at least they irritate the crap out of most of us. And there's also a lot of bigger, scarier issues that we all need to deal with. And the way we deal with them is by thinking first, I almost said, what would Fritty do? Of thinking of first of what's best for other people and also ourselves, but we need to work together. So I thank you for coming to work with me. And as always, it's been a great pleasure to share some time with you. And I send you from our house our love and best wishes, and hope to see you again next Sunday when we will continue reading Tailchaser's song. So good night, be good, stay well,